Mr. Chairman, members of the board, it is an opportunity tonight to look at our budget. It's on our formal and final budget, which will be presented next month after getting input at our last work session, and of course tonight in our next work session. We are going to see some unique things in the budget like we spoke last time, particularly when it relates to the new biennium. And because of that, we have some considerations and impact that we have to look at as we move forward with our budget. The new biennium begins next year. It's a 2-year budget, and so what we're doing is to evaluate our budget over 2 years. And with that, we know that the conversion agreement that occurred with Clifton Fords 15 years ago expires during the 2nd year of the biennium. We also know that our local composite index will go from 0.2423 to 0.292899, which is a significant increase or a significant decrease of state funding for our school division in the 2nd year of the biennium. And so, taking that into account, we also know that and that's approximately a loss of about $700,000. So taking that into consideration, whatever we look at for FY 2019, we have to consider for FY 2020. And so hence, we're looking 2 years down the road. Now, there's a couple givens in this budget. The first is that boys' home residents at this point will no longer attend Alleghany County Public Schools. The estimated impact for us that for next year with our ADM, our average daily membership, and also the foster home funding that we receive is almost $500,000. We also know that the Alleghany Foundation funding for the Virginia Preschool Initiative ends on June 30th, 2018, which will impact our budget of about, we'll pick up the local share of continuing the VPI program of about $50,000. We also know that the Alleghany Foundation is ending their funding of the nursing program. This year was 50%, next year it's going to be 25%, and in FY 2020 there will be no funding from the foundation regarding our nursing program. So for us to maintain our nurses in some way, shape, or form, that's going to be an extra cost in the budget. On the positive side of things, we also know that our bond payments for the renovation of Alleghany High School's heating and air conditioning system is paid off at the end of this year, and so we'll pick up an additional funding for $410,000. And as you go through the budget, if you look at FY or 2018-19 school year, you're going to see that we'll probably have a surplus at the end of this year. But what you have to keep in mind as you're going forward is you're going to look at FY 2020 is that we may have a deficit. So if we would add a position this year, okay, then we would certainly have to eliminate that position next year. So hence we look 2 years down the road. We also, I think it's important in this budget, we redeveloped the salary scales last year across the division. The governor's budget suggests, or in the governor's budget, is that they will provide a 2% raise. However, the interesting part of that is that does not begin until January of 2020, the second half of the 2nd year. So it's really only a quarter of the 4 semesters that we have. And so for us to get that matching funds, which is a little over $100,000, we'd have to give a 2% raise average over that 2-year biennium. So what we have put into the budget is a 1% raise or a 1-step raise, which is what our steps equal to next year, and then a 1% raise the following year, which gives us a 2% raise. And so, I don't think it's a budget I would like to recommend. If we had other things of additional funding, we'd be certainly changing certain things, but it's a budget we have to work with and be realistic about what we have in our funding for the future. So at this time, I'll let Mr. Rice go into the details of the budget that we put together.
I will hit the high spots tonight since you got the detail at our last meeting. I do want to reiterate what the superintendent said is we have an unusual situation this year, having to look 2 years out instead of our typical one because of the composite index changing midstream. And it does have a significant financial impact because it means the locality pays a larger portion of the cost of funding public education. And When you combine that with the loss of students, that doubles our issue. Thank goodness with the re-benchmarking of the formulas that fund public education, there were actually some improvements in that helped negate some of the losses we have, or it could have been worse. But just hit the high spots again. We have the composite index currently at 0.2423 and at 0.2899 in the second year. You'll see our losses of students at 83 for 2019 fiscal year, and then a cumulative total of 133 in the second year. Our total SOQ funded programs, which is the main funding source from the state and where a lot of the funding formulas come through, we're actually going to improve there in the first year. We're going to decline in the second year again because of the composite index and the loss of students. The incentive programs are going to increase slightly, but in the first year, that's primarily due to the academic year governor's school. We transfer that money to the governor's school with a fiscal agent. It's highlighted in yellow, so it indicates it's a pass-through item. It doesn't necessarily impact our bottom line, and you'll also see in the second year, that's the compensation supplement that the superintendent mentioned earlier. We do have to give a 2% average raise over 2 years in order to receive that funding. If we don't give the raise, we don't receive the funding. Let's see. So we scroll on down to, you'll still see, for the totals, you'll see an improvement there. Under the categorical, we have the school lunch funds that we transfer over to the cafeteria fund, and then our homebound funding is down slightly there as well. So we see a reduction in both years for the categorical funding. And then in the lottery funding programs, it's funny, I've read some information in the papers lately where the state has talked about actually giving all the lottery funding back to school divisions the way that was previously intended, instead of using it to supplant other methods of funding. We'll see if that ever happens. The regular foster care we have received, and we have budgeted this year almost $157,000. We have zero next for fiscal year 19 and zero for fiscal year 20. Again, that's the impact of the loss of voice home students because we receive foster care funding with their participation. We'll no longer have that. And so we get on down and you'll see the impact in total state funds adjusted for pass-throughs. We're actually going to pick up some in fiscal year 19. We're going to see a significant loss in fiscal year 20 because of the composite index and the continued reduction in students. Our other state funding will stay consistent through the 2 years. That's the National Board certification and our Medicaid reimbursement. Federal funds will also take some lumps on that. Primarily, the biggest one is in our Forest Reserve money, or PILT as it's known in some cases. We're going to see a loss of $103,000 approximately there. That is something that Congress opted not to reauthorize, and a lot of states, especially ones with large federal land withholdings, paid a penalty for that. I think the superintendent's made some initiatives to reach out to our members of Congress for that.
We have 33 U.S. senators that have signed off on to provide us funding back with that on both sides of the aisle. So hopefully that will go forward. The AASA has been lobbying to keep that and to bring that money back in. So I don't know where it will turn out that, but we will keep working on that. So a lot of state senators from the western part of the country that have the large open national parks and forestry, so hopefully we'll still monitor that. And I know that Senator Kane and Senator Warner are definitely on board with that as well. So.
Our federal funds are estimated to take a reduction of approximately $104,000 both years. So because of, again, the Forest Reserve and a slight reduction in the E-rate reimbursement due to the fact that they do not fund telephony, and I thank Jeff Allman for pronouncing that correctly for me. They don't provide the rebates to that like they did, so that's impacted us a little bit. Local revenues, this model at this point in time shows the current funding from the county of $9.3 million, miscellaneous other revenues. We expect a slight decline in that of $13,000, and that'll be the same for the second year. And so the impact on total local funding is minor, but it's still negative. And then our total revenues adjusted for the pass-throughs are projected to be unfavorable by almost $39,000 the first year and by $919,000 the second year. So we take that forecasted reduction in our funding and we add to that requested increases in expenditures, some of which we feel are required. Those are the items highlighted in blue. They include such things as increases in electrical utility costs, a potential cost increase in our telecommunications expenditures for an upgrade to our phone and internet system, which is something we have to do. It allows inflationary adjustments for supplies and purchase services. It also allows for the increase in funding to maintain the Virginia Preschool Initiative. It includes additional funding to maintain the nurse grant as it's currently staffed. It includes additional funding, $173,000 first year and double that second year because we're going to give 2 raises, one each year, of a step increase. And then for those that are already at the top of the scale, 0.25% increase for the few positions we have that are not on a scale, they would receive 1%. We also currently have projected an additional $100,000 in contribution to the health insurance premiums. We're still awaiting to receive those. We've had some positive news in the last month on the ongoing claims history, so we're hoping we're going to see a less of an increase than we could have otherwise. So when you get through all of that, you get to an additional request of $571,000 in additional expenditures, and you add that to the $38,000 we were already in the hole, and we have a $610,000 gap here, or $1.7 million.
Can you scroll it over a little bit, Mr. President? You'll see the second year, okay, if we calculate what we did above, we're going to be short approximately $1.77, $44,000. So as we built this year's budget, in our reduction of expenses, we had to look over here as well, okay? And so, because again, in our operating budget that we did it 1 year, it was going to be the same the second year. And so, I'll let Mr. Rice continue on our additional revenue.
One good bit of news is the actual Virginia retirement system rates for professional staff have gone down for the next biennium, and that's going to result in an approximate savings of almost $77,000 for us. Again, we project that in the second year. We have, as has been mentioned before, the expiration of our debt on AHS, which frees up the $410,000 we can use for that. We have replacement benefit, which includes, it compares the staffing we have today and the known retirements that we know about already. Compare that to what we're budgeted for this year. That produces a savings of $174,000 to apply toward our reduction. Then we're projecting a reduction of 2 teaching positions in fiscal year 2019, 2 more in fiscal year 2020.
I'll stop there a second. Those are positions, those aren't people. Both those positions we're talking about for next year are already empty, correct?
Yes.
And so one's a special needs position, and one is a position at Clifton Middle School. But it also works with our student numbers, and so class size does not change that much.
And some of these areas that you see with zeros associated with them are ones where they're potential reductions that are mainly going to be in effect in year 2 when we receive less funding due to the composite index and the loss of enrollment. But 2 that are placed here more for conversation is a cap on the funding of dual enrollment and the governor's school and at current levels, and a cap on the Jackson River Technical Center budget at current levels. And again, that's there for informational purposes. We also forecast an elimination of 2 teacher assistant positions in fiscal year 19 and 2 more in fiscal year 20 for a total of 4 over the 2-year period. And we'll eliminate some funding for transportation dispatcher. That position is now an exempt position, so it's not qualifying for overtime, and the part-time psychologist. And you can see the other reductions or expenditure offsets that we'll have in year 2 that we do not need in year 1 at this point. And one of the big ones will be elimination of school buses at 174, and we will utilize year-end funds if we have some for that purpose. We also plan to request an additional funding from the county to fund us back to where they funded us in 2015. We've had reductions the previous 2 years in funding from the state, from the county, excuse me. To eliminate the substitute custodian position at the garage, to reduce supplemental athletic funding for the high school and the middle school, to replace one of the assistant principal positions at the high school with an athletic director at a lower non-administrative cost. And that's pretty much the highlight of the offsets. That would create a surplus for us in year 1, fiscal year 2019, of $236,000. Our plan at this point would be to purchase school buses with that and get us ahead of the curve. In fiscal year 2, we'd still be looking at a $55,000 deficit, which we'll continue to look at ways to make up. I do want to remind everyone that the school board will only approve a budget for fiscal year 19. This is for planning purposes a year out when we have less revenue. We know we're not going to receive it, because if we make expenditure decisions now that impact us and commit us for beyond, and we don't have the funding to pay for it, we're going to find ourselves in a difficult situation. So
The other part of here, and Mr. Rice, you maybe mentioned this and I missed it, is that we currently have 1 nurse in each building. 2 of those are part-time nurses, but we also have a nursing administrative position and a nursing administrative assistant position. Right now, looking at the second year, we would eliminate both the nursing assistant's position and the nurse coordinator's position in there. If we would maintain that, then this deficit could rise. We'd have to recoup the expenses somewhere. Now, those aren't immediate things. Those are things as we go through next year, and we have budget time this year. There's still a lot of variables out there. I mean, we don't know what the House and the Senate do, and the budget's coming together to see what additional funding we get, and so that could change significantly as well. But again, what you see is a surplus here. What would that surplus be used for? It could be used for those buses, which is, we've done a great job of maintaining our bus fleet, and we replace them when we need to. A lot of divisions extend the use of their buses. I'd have a hard time putting old buses that are older than 15 years out on our mountainous roads, and so we want to maintain that fleet. It's too easy to cut that area out of your budget, and then 5 years down the road, you're purchasing 10, 12, 14 buses. And so we have to maintain that. Had some preliminary talks with Mr. Lanford as well about our budget, so he was well informed of where we're moving with it. And so we still have a lot of variables. Hopefully between now and our next work session in 2 weeks, and then our meeting in February, we'll have more questions, more answers to some of the questions we've been asking as well. So, do you have any questions? Any questions?
Actually, I do have a question. I know we adopted our legislative priorities at our December meeting. Is there any way we could amend those and ask the state to start funding our nursing program?
Absolutely.
And put that in as a legislative priority for our school board?
Absolutely. If you want to craft a motion tonight, I would recommend that, and then I can get that out tomorrow. Or
I think what the state will tell you is they do fund nurses. It's embedded in the, at least partially, and it's embedded in the standards of quality formulas. They don't break it out as a separate issue, but they don't adequately fund it, that's for sure.
I think I'm that would be excellent, and so I would encourage you to go to formal motion for that, and pass that, and we'll take care of that tomorrow.
So have we submitted those legislative priorities?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, just to remind you, if we add that as a motion to the agenda, we have to have the board vote on it, has to be unanimous. So if we want to do that, we have to go that process, which is easy to do.
I think that's a good idea. I think it highlights something that we've talked a lot about, I think you heard a young lady tonight who said that our nurses are now on the front line of healthcare because people cannot always afford to go to the doctor. And that has changed significantly. And so if we eliminate any of that, we will not have that ability.
I have a couple of questions.
Can I get the pencil right to make the answer? Sure.
The local composite index that we are basing the 2020 budget on, do we know that's going to be the,
Yes.
Yes.
and it's not going to change with the reassessment and stuff in the county?
Now, what happened is the real value property, both here and in Covington, rose significantly in comparison to the rest of the Commonwealth. So while Northern Virginia's real property value dropped in the big pie, our pie went up. Now, remember, we're 2 years behind. So I have a feeling, just by looking at the real property value, there's a possibility that that may start to drop again. But don't know that for sure. And we weren't notified this until mid-November, when we got notification. Is that right, or was it October?
As far as the composite, it was November.
Yeah, it's mid-November, so yeah. And they asked us to check the real property value. So we went back to Mr. Lanford, County Administrator, they went back and checked the real property value, and yeah, I was gonna say, we asked them to do it again, and they sat and went, and that's what they came up with, so. And you gotta remember, it's the pie, okay?
Plus
So it's
sales
ours.
tax, plus
Yeah.
income.
Yeah.
It's a complicated formula.